The old man sat on the weathered bench like clockwork, every evening at 5:30, rain or shine. His name was Chester Holloway, though nobody in Millbrook knew that yet. The green metal bench had become his anchor to the world, positioned at the corner of Maple Street and 3rd Avenue where the city bus made its final stop. Before turning toward the depot, Chester would arrive precisely as the church bells chimed the half-hour. Carrying his worn leather satchel and wearing the same navy cardigan that had seen better decades, he would sit, hands folded over his walking cane, and watch each bus arrive and depart until darkness fell. Most people assumed he was waiting for someone. They were right, but not in the way they imagined. On this particular Tuesday in October, as autumn painted the maple trees in shades of gold and crimson, a small voice broke through Chester's evening ritual. "Mister, why do you come here every day?" Chester turned to find a girl of perhaps 8 years old, with tangled auburn hair and eyes the color of summer grass. She wore a backpack nearly as large as herself, and clutched a wrinkled permission slip in her small hand. "I beg your pardon, young lady. My mom says you sit here every single day. She drives past on her way home from work. She says you never get on any bus." The child shifted her weight from foot to foot, clearly nervous, but determined. "Are you lost?" Chester studied the girl's earnest face. In 43 years of sitting at this bus stop, no one had ever asked him that question directly. "What's your name, child?" "Rosalie Brennan. But everyone calls me Rosie. I live on Elm Street." 2 blocks over, she pointed vaguely behind her. "I was supposed to catch the bus to my piano lesson, but I gave the money to Jeremy Patterson because his lunch account was empty, and he was embarrassed. So now I have to walk, but I wanted to ask you first." The simple honesty of her confession stirred something in Chester's chest that had been dormant for years. "That was very kind of you, Rosie. My grandmother always said kindness costs nothing but means everything. She died last spring." Rosie's voice grew quieter. "She used to sit with me at bus stops too, when I was scared." Chester felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever children mentioned grandparents. "I'm sure she was a wonderful woman." "She was. So why do you sit here? Are you waiting for your family?" The question hung in the cooling air between them. Chester had rehearsed this moment countless times in his mind, but faced with this child's genuine curiosity, the practiced words felt insufficient. "In a way, yes," he said finally, "though it's more complicated than that." Rosie settled herself on the far end of the bench, her legs swinging freely above the ground. "I have time. My piano teacher, Mrs. Henderson, won't be mad if I'm late. She knows about my grandmother." Chester looked at the small girl who had somehow managed to crack open a door he'd kept locked for decades. Something about her reminded him of someone he'd lost long ago, though he couldn't quite place what. "I used to drive the Route 47 bus," Chester began, his voice carrying the weight of old memories. "For 38 years. I drove this very route, stopping at this very corner." "Really? That's so cool. Did you know all the people who rode your bus?" "Many of them, yes. Especially the regulars. There was Mrs. Kowalski who took the morning bus to her job at the textile mill. Mr. Jameson who caught the evening route to visit his wife at Mercy Hospital. The Gonzalez twins who rode to high school each day, always arguing about baseball." Chester's voice grew softer as he continued. "And there was a little girl, about your age, who rode my bus every Tuesday and Thursday to her violin lessons downtown." Rosie's eyes widened. "What was her name?" "Emma. Emma Catherine Holloway." Chester's hands tightened on his cane. "She was my granddaughter." The admission hung between them like a bridge. Chester had been afraid to cross for years. Rosie seemed to sense the weight of what he'd shared. Was she nice? She was everything good in this world, Chester said, his voice barely above a whisper. Curious like you. Kind like you. She had this way of making everyone on the bus smile, even on their worst days. Does she still take violin lessons? Chester closed his eyes, feeling the familiar ache that never quite went away. No, sweetheart. Emma died 7 years ago. She was 12. The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of silence. Rosie didn't offer empty condolences or change the subject like most adults would. Instead, she simply said, "I'm sorry. That must hurt very much." "It does," Chester admitted. "Every single day." "Is that why you sit here? Because you miss her?" Chester nodded, unable to trust his voice for a moment. When he finally spoke, the story poured out of him like water through a broken dam. "Emma lived with me and my wife after her parents died in a car accident when she was 6. We became her world, and she became ours. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she'd board my bus at this very stop, violin case in hand, chattering about school or friends or some book she'd read." He paused, watching a city bus approach in the distance. "She'd always sit right behind me so we could talk. The other passengers loved her. She'd help elderly riders with their groceries, share her homework with kids who were struggling, and she remembered everyone's names." The bus pulled up with a hydraulic sigh, opened its doors, and departed empty. Chester had watched this scene thousands of times. On April 15th, 7 years ago, Emma was walking to this bus stop for her Thursday lesson. She was running a bit late because she'd stopped to help Mrs. Chen next door with her garden. Emma was always doing things like that. Chester's voice grew strained. A drunk driver ran the red light at the intersection of Maple and 2nd Street. Emma was crossing legally in the crosswalk. She never had a chance. Rosie reached over and gently touched Chester's arm. "Were you driving the bus that day?" "No," Chester whispered. "I was filling in on the Route 23 across town. My replacement, Jim Morrison, was the one who found her. He radioed for help, but it was too late." The devastating irony wasn't lost on either of them. Chester had spent decades safely transporting other people's children, only to lose his own granddaughter on the one day he wasn't there to protect her. After Emma died, I couldn't drive anymore. Every route reminded me of her. Every child who boarded my bus looked like her. I retired early, and my wife Martha and I moved to a small apartment downtown. "Where's your wife now?" "Martha passed 3 years ago. Her heart just gave out. The doctor said it was a massive heart attack, but I think she died of a broken heart." "We both did, in different ways." Chester looked at Rosie, the small stranger who had somehow gotten him to share more in 10 minutes than he'd spoken to anyone in years. "After Martha died, I started coming here. At first, it was just to feel close to Emma somehow. But then I began to notice things." "What kind of things?" "Children walking to this bus stop alone, just like Emma used to. Some of them seemed scared or lost. Others were being bullied by older kids. Some had parents who worked late and couldn't pick them up from after-school activities." Chester gestured toward the street corner. "I realized this intersection was still dangerous. The city never fixed the timing on that traffic light. Drivers still run red lights here. Children still cross alone." Understanding dawned in Rosie's green eyes. "So you watch out for them." "I try to, in small ways. I've called 911 3 times when I've seen accidents about to happen. I've walked children across the street when the crossing guard was sick. Last winter, I gave my coat to a boy whose jacket was too thin for the cold. That's really nice of you. It doesn't bring Emma back, Chester said simply. But maybe it keeps someone else's Emma safe. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the early evening traffic flow past. Rosie swung her legs thoughtfully. My grandmother used to say that people who've lost someone special become angels for other people. She said that's how love keeps going even after someone dies. Chester felt tears threatening for the first time in months. This child, this beautiful, wise child, had somehow put into words what he'd been feeling, but couldn't express. Your grandmother sounds like she was very smart. She was. She also said that sometimes the people who need help the most are the ones who are helping everybody else. The observation struck Chester with unexpected force. When had anyone last asked if he needed help? When had he last allowed himself to need anything from another person? Rosie, how far did you say your piano lesson was? About 2 miles. It's okay though. I like walking, and Mrs. Henderson will understand. Chester stood up slowly, his joints protesting after sitting for so long. Would you allow an old man to drive you there? I have a car parked just around the corner. Really? But what about your bus watching? I think I can miss one evening. Besides, Emma would want me to make sure you got to your lesson safely. As they walked toward Chester's old blue sedan, Rosie chattered about her piano pieces and her teacher. Chester found himself smiling genuinely for the first time in years. Mr. Chester, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think Emma knows you sit at the bus stop? Chester considered the question seriously. I don't know, sweetheart, but I hope so. I think she does. And I think she's proud of you for taking care of other kids. They reached the car, and Chester opened the passenger door for Rosie. As she climbed into the seat, she looked up at him. With those remarkable green eyes, would it be okay if I sat with you sometimes, at the bus stop? I mean, I don't have piano lessons every day, and my mom works late a lot. Chester felt something shift inside his chest, like a door that had been locked finally swinging open. I would like that very much. As they drove through the familiar streets of Millbrook, Chester found himself telling Rosie stories about Emma, about Martha, about the passengers who had ridden his bus over the years. Rosie listened with the kind of attention that only children possess, asking thoughtful questions and making connections that surprised him. They pulled up outside Mrs. Henderson's house just as the streetlights began to flicker on. Rosie gathered her backpack and turned to Chester. Thank you for the ride. And thank you for telling me about Emma. She sounds like she was really special. She was. And Rosie, yes, thank you for asking why I sit at the bus stop. No one ever asked me that before. Sometimes the most important questions are the ones nobody thinks to ask. Rosie said, unconsciously echoing another piece of her grandmother's wisdom. As Chester drove home, he realized something had fundamentally changed. For 7 years, he had been sitting at that bus stop, carrying his grief like a stone in his chest. Tonight, for the first time, the weight felt different, not gone, but transformed into something he could share rather than something he had to bear alone. The next evening, Chester arrived at his usual time, but his routine felt different. Instead of simply watching and waiting, he found himself looking forward to something. At 5:45, he spotted a familiar figure with an oversized backpack walking down Maple Street. "Hi, Mr. Chester," Rosie called out, settling beside him on the bench. "How was your day?" "Better than most," Chester replied honestly. "How was your piano lesson?" "Good. Mrs. Henderson taught me a new piece. It's called For Elise. She said it's about love that lasts forever." Chester smiled, That sounds beautiful. It is. But it's also kind of sad. Like happy and sad at the same time. That's called bittersweet, Chester said. It's one of the most honest emotions there is. They sat together watching the evening. Commuters hurry past. Chester pointed out some of the regulars he'd come to know over the years of sitting there. The young mother with twins who always looked exhausted. The construction worker who read poetry books on the bus. The teenager who helped elderly passengers with their groceries. You really do notice everyone. Rosie observed, Emma taught me that. She said every person has a story, and most people are fighting battles we can't see. She was really wise for a 12-year-old. She got that from her grandmother, my wife Martha. Martha could see the good in anyone. As they talked, Chester began to realize that his evening vigil had taken on new meaning. Instead of being just a place to hold his grief, the bus stop was becoming a place where he could honor Emma's memory by doing what she would have done, noticing people who needed kindness. Over the following weeks, Chester and Rosie's friendship deepened. She would join him several evenings a week, sometimes bringing homework to do while they sat together. Chester discovered that her mother, Sarah, was a single parent working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Rosie spent many afternoons alone, which explained why she was so mature for her age. One chilly November evening, as they sat bundled in coats and scarves, Rosie made an observation that would change everything. Mr. Chester, have you noticed the woman who gets off the 6:15 bus every Tuesday? Chester looked up to see a middle-aged woman with graying brown hair. Stepping off the approaching bus, she walked with a slight limp and always kept her head down. I've seen her. Yes. Why do you ask? She always looks so sad. And she has the same eyes as you did when I first met you. Chester watched the woman disappear around the corner toward the residential streets. You're very observant, Rosie. My grandmother taught me to notice when people are hurting. She said hurting people recognize each other. The next Tuesday, both Chester and Rosie paid closer attention to the woman. She appeared to be in her 50s, wearing a worn navy coat and carrying a small bouquet of flowers. She moved slowly, as if each step required effort. Should we say hello? Rosie whispered. Let's give her some space first, Chester advised. Sometimes people need time before they're ready to talk. But Faye had other plans. As the woman stepped off the bus, a gust of wind caught her bouquet, scattering the flowers across the sidewalk. Without hesitation, Rosie jumped up to help gather them. So, thank you, sweetheart, the woman said, her voice soft and grateful. That's very kind of you. You're welcome. I'm Rosie, and this is my friend Chester. We sit here most evenings. The woman glanced toward Chester with cautious recognition. I've seen you both. I'm Helen Morrison. Chester felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. Morrison. Yes, my husband was Jim Morrison. He used to drive for the city transit system. Chester's hands tightened on his cane as the pieces fell into place. Jim Morrison, the bus driver who had found Emma after the accident. The man who had tried desperately to save her life. Mrs. Morrison, Chester said carefully, I believe your husband knew my granddaughter. Helen's face went pale. Your granddaughter? Emma Holloway. She was struck by a car at this intersection 7 years ago. Your husband was driving the bus that day. Helen sat down heavily on the bench, the rescued flowers trembling in her hands. Emma, oh, dear God, you're Chester Holloway. The recognition was mutual now, and with it came a flood of emotions that neither had expected. Jim never got over that day, Helen said, tears starting to flow. He blamed himself. Even though everyone told him there was nothing he could have done. He quit driving 6 months later. Chester felt his own eyes filling. I never blamed him. I hope he knew that. He didn't. Jim spent the last 6 years of his life believing he had failed that little girl. He died of a stroke 2 months ago, and his last words were about Emma. Rosie looked between the two adults, understanding dawning on her young face. You both lost someone you loved because of the same terrible day. Helen nodded through her tears. I come here every Tuesday to bring flowers to the corner where it happened. Jim used to come with me until he got too sick. I didn't know you came here too. Chester reached over and gently took Helen's hand. Your husband was a good man, Helen. He radioed for help immediately. He stayed with Emma until the ambulance arrived. The paramedics told me he never left her side. Really. He held her hand and talked to her so she wouldn't be afraid. That meant everything to me, even in my grief. Helen broke down completely then, crying for the husband who had carried guilt that was never his to bear, and for the child whose death had haunted their family for 7 years. Chester found himself crying too, not just for Emma, but for this woman whose husband had suffered needlessly, and for all the pain that could have been shared and lightened if they had found each other sooner. Rosie, wise beyond her years, simply sat between them and held both their hands until the storm of emotion passed. I think Emma brought us together, Helen said finally, and I think Jim would want us to be friends. I think you're right. Chester agreed. And I think Emma would want us to take care of each other. From that evening forward, their small group at the bus stop became a family of choice. Helen began joining Chester and Rosie several evenings a week. They shared stories about their lost loved ones, but they also began to heal together in ways none of them could have managed alone. Chester learned that Helen struggled with loneliness and depression since Jim's death. Helen discovered that Chester had been isolating himself, living on grief and duty rather than connection. Rosie, in her innocent wisdom, showed them both that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant finding new ways to love and be loved. As winter deepened into spring, their friendship grew stronger. Chester began driving Helen to her doctor's appointments. Helen started cooking meals for Chester, who had been living on frozen dinners since Martha died. Rosie brought them both small gifts she made in art class and helped them both remember how to laugh. One evening in late April, as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Helen made an announcement. I've decided to stop bringing flowers to the corner. Chester looked surprised. Are you sure? Yes. Jim and I spent 7 years focused on the place where Emma died. But sitting here with you both, I realize we should be celebrating the places where she lived. Helen pulled a small photo from her purse. It showed a smiling girl with long dark hair and bright eyes, sitting in the front seat of a school bus. Jim took this picture of Emma on one of her good days when she was helping an elderly passenger with his walker. He kept it on his dashboard for years. Chester took the photo with trembling hands. I've never seen this before. Jim always meant to give it to you, but he was too ashamed to face you after the accident. He thought you'd blame him. Never. Chester whispered, studying his granddaughter's joyful face. Look at her. She's doing exactly what she always did, helping someone. Rosie leaned over to see the photo. She looks like she was really happy. She was, Chester said, and I think she'd be happy to know that her death, as terrible as it was, brought 3 lonely people together to take care of each other. As spring turned to summer, their evening gatherings at the bus stop became a neighborhood fixture. Other regular commuters began stopping to chat. The elderly man who read poetry books started sharing verses with them. The young mother with twins accepted Helen's offers to watch the children when she had errands to run. The teenager who helped with groceries began joining their conversations about school and future plans. Chester realized that the bus stop had become what Emma would have wanted it to be, a place where people looked out for each other. 1 year after their first meeting, on a warm October evening with the maple trees again dressed in gold and crimson, Rosie made an announcement. "I have something to tell you both." Chester and Helen looked at her expectantly. "My mom got a promotion at work. We're moving to Portland next month." The news hit Chester like a physical blow. He had already lost Emma and Martha. Now he was losing Rosie too. "I'm going to miss you both so much," Rosie continued, tears starting to flow. "You've been like the grandfather and grandmother I needed after Grandma died." Helen pulled Rosie into a tight hug. "And you've been the granddaughter we both needed." Chester felt his own tears coming. "What will I do without my bus stop partner?" "You'll keep watching out for people," Rosie said firmly, "and Mrs. Helen will help you. And maybe you'll find other kids who need someone to care about them. Promise me you'll write." Helen said, "I promise, and I want you both to promise me something too, anything." Chester said, "Promise me you'll keep being a family, even without me. Promise me you'll take care of each other." Chester and Helen looked at each other and saw the same understanding reflected in both their faces. They had found something precious in their shared grief and healing. They weren't going to let it go. "We promise," they said together, on Rosie's last evening in Millbrook. The three of them sat together on the bus stop bench as the sun set behind the maple trees. Chester had brought a small wrapped package. "This is for you to remember us by," he said, handing it to Rosie. Inside was the photo of Emma that Helen had shared, along with a new picture Chester had taken of the three of them together, and a letter written in his careful handwriting. "Read the letter when you get to Portland," Chester said. "It explains everything I want you to know about kindness and love, and how sometimes the people we lose send us the people we need." As Rosie's mother arrived to pick her up, there were tears and hugs and promises to stay in touch. But there was also something else, a sense of completion, as if something that had been broken was finally whole again. After Rosie left, Chester and Helen sat in comfortable silence, watching the evening commuters hurry past. "She changed everything, didn't she?" Helen said finally. "She did. She asked the right question at the right time to the right person. What will we do now?" Chester smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. "We'll keep doing what Emma would have done. We'll pay attention. We'll be kind. We'll watch out for people who need watching out for." Together, as they sat there in the gathering dusk, a small boy approached the bus stop, looking lost and frightened. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old, and tears were streaming down his face. Chester and Helen exchanged a look of understanding, without needing to discuss it. They both stood up and approached the child. "Hey there, son," Chester said, gently. "Are you okay?" "I'm lost," the boy sobbed. "I can't find my mom." "Well, we're going to help you find her," Helen said, kneeling down to the boy's level. "What's your name?" "Tommy." "It's nice to meet you, Tommy. I'm Helen, and this is Chester. We're very good at helping people who are lost." As they comforted the frightened child and called the police to report a missing parent, Chester felt Emma's presence more strongly than he had in years, not as a ghost or a supernatural visitation, but as a living reminder that love continues. Kindness multiplies, and sometimes the best way to honor those we've lost is to care for those who still need us. 20 minutes later, Tommy was reunited with his frantic mother, who had been searching the neighborhood after he wandered away from their yard. The grateful woman offered to give Chester and Helen a reward, but they declined. "Just remember to teach Tommy to be kind to others," Helen said. "That's payment enough." As the family disappeared into the night, Chester and Helen returned to their bench. "I think Rosie was right," Helen said. "Emma did bring us together, and now Emma, Jim, and Rosie are all sending us other people to care for." Chester added, "They sat in comfortable silence to people who had found family in loss, purpose in pain, and hope in the simple act of showing up for each other day after day." At a bus stop, where kindness had learned to bloom again, the evening grew dark around them, but neither felt alone. They had learned that grief shared is grief divided, that love given is love multiplied, and that sometimes the most profound healing happens not when we get what we've lost back, but when we discover what we've gained in the losing. And every evening thereafter, as the buses came and went at the corner of Maple Street and 3rd Avenue, two friends continued their quiet vigil, watching, caring, and keeping alive the memory of a little girl who had taught them all that kindness costs nothing but means everything.